Early this morning, the sun was shining. The heat was so intense that there was no relief from the scorching rays even in the shade. The wind barely stirred the leaves of the olive trees, frozen in stillness. The sky was so clear and cloudless that it looked as if an artist had spilled paint on the horizon. The street thermometer read 28 degrees, and only the fans provided any relief. 3 families and a lonely old man called Oscar Moreno Diaz lived in the street with only a few houses. It was 9 o'clock, and in one of the houses on the street, the whole family had been at the table for half an hour. It was a family of 3, the members of the Diaz family, who were having breakfast and enjoying the day off. The husband and wife were discussing what they could give their neighbor Benjamin Navarro. After all, tomorrow would be his birthday, so a party was planned, to which everyone was invited, except old Oscar Moreno. "Well, what do you suggest we give Benjamin?" I asked Martina Diaz, pouring freshly brewed coffee into my cup and then into my husband's cup. "Well, maybe something technological," replied Castor Diaz. "Technology? I think he already has lots of different gadgets," laughed Martina. "He seems to like photography. Maybe we should give him a professional camera," I suggested. "I think that's a good idea. Although he has an old camera, now he'll have a new one, and what's more, a professional one," said Martina. Dominic stopped playing at the table. Martina turned her attention to our 10-year-old son. "Are you going to eat today?" Dominic hesitated, but then went back to playing with his toy. "Dominic, you need to listen to your mother," said Castor, handing him a newspaper. "Come on, have some." The boy looked around to make sure no one was watching and gave some of his food to the dog, who was lying on the floor with his tongue sticking out because of the heat. Dominic didn't always like to eat in the morning, so he fed the pet. "Dominic, I see everything," Castor said, still reading the newspaper. Then he quickly put it aside and looked at our son, smiling and bringing the cup to his lips. At that moment, Martina approached the sink to wash the dishes. There was a window above the sink overlooking the street. After a moment, Martina let out a short laugh and stopped washing the dishes. "What's so funny?" I asked, interested, putting the newspaper away and looking away from our son to my wife. "Oh, old Oscar's outside again, wandering the street and collecting empty bottles. He's humming something too." "Same as always," Martina replied. I walked over to my wife, finding the scene equally funny. We used to watch the lonely old man who lived in the same street, wandering around and collecting bottles. Every neighbor, including our family, had the habit of throwing garbage into his yard for a laugh. We knew for sure that the old man definitely wasn't offended. He didn't care. Oscar had no wife or children. He was 60 years old. All we knew about him was that he moved to this town in the early 2010s and settled in an empty house. He never wanted to make friends, but he didn't hold grudges either. He was neutral, unlike his neighbors. He was fine, or so everyone thought. But the neighbors saw him as a simple beggar, a useless man with nothing in life, just existing. They believed he had no interests, goals, or meaning in life. For them, he served no purpose and sometimes even irritated them with his presence. Nobody liked him, but there was no apparent reason for such treatment. The old man had done nothing wrong, except perhaps occasionally in the evenings, he liked to sing the same song while playing the guitar. He sang very well, but even this small detail didn't make him beloved by his neighbors. Sometimes people need very little to dislike someone ordinary and common. "Where did he get that guitar?" the neighbors wondered. "Maybe he stole it from someone, that's probably it." Everyone nearby was convinced that he was drunk every night, not just on weekends or specific days and holidays, every night. Perhaps they came to this conclusion from Oscar's behavior. He was often cheerful and happy, but no one could confirm whether he was really drunk. In summer, Oscar almost always wore the same clothes: pants, a shirt, and a straw hat. "Doesn't he ever buy himself new clothes?" "No, what was the point?" We knew he hadn't worked for a long time, but no one knew what he did before, if he ever worked at all. This old man was both a mystery and a simpleton. Parents never let their children near him. For some reason, they didn't trust this old man, and it was all fabricated by the neighbors themselves. There was no visible evidence that he was a bad person, and that children should never go near him. It just happened. People rarely liked people like Oscar Moreno. But why? What is he going to teach them? What could he teach the children? How to collect the best bottles in the neighborhood and drink cheap alcohol? They laughed, but not everyone thought categorically about this old man. There was only one person who didn't see anything wrong or horrible in him. He didn't see a miserable beggar or a poor simpleton in a straw hat drinking at night. He simply saw a kind old man playing good tunes on his guitar. That person was Mato, son of Benjamin Navarro Alonso. Pablo and Inez Alonso had just woken up. They were a young couple who had recently married, both 23 years old. They didn't like Mr. Moreno either. "Look, dear, Moreno never misses a beat. He always collects his bottles on time," said the young woman with a sharp tone. "It looks like he's really in need if he's collecting, or maybe he's just bored. No family, no interests, nothing." Pablo replied, "Yes, you're right. By the way, what should we give Benjamin as a present?" "I don't know. Let's stop at the hardware store today and see if we can find anything there." "Sure. Let's do that," said Inez, kissing Pablo Navarro. On August 6th, at the Navarro house, which was the closest to the home of the lonely old man called Oscar Moreno, today was a long-awaited celebration, Benjamin Navarro's 40th birthday. 3 members of the Navarro family, along with the arriving guests, were completely immersed in the celebration. The air was filled with an atmosphere of joy, fun, and leisure. The guests were in a great mood. Everyone was joking and chatting about various topics. The table was adorned with various delicious dishes: tacos, enchiladas, churros, pumpkin empanada, sopapillas, and chicken burritos. In terms of alcoholic drinks, there was tequila, mezcal, and beer, and for the children there was watermelon juice and chamoyada. As mentioned, Benjamin had a 10-year-old son called Mato and a wife called Ursula. In addition to the guests, the neighbors also came to the celebration: Martina and Castor with their son Dominic, the young couple Pablo and Inez Alonso. An hour had passed since the start of the celebration, and nothing special had happened so far. "Well, my dear friends, I'm glad you could all come and join me for the celebration. I really appreciate it. Let's have a toast," said Benjamin, raising his glass. "Hooray!" everyone cheered. "And I'm really impressed with your gifts," said Benjamin in a slightly inebriated voice. "Honestly, I don't know which is the best. Each one is better than the other," everyone laughed. "By the way, who lives next door?" asked one of Benjamin's work friends. "Oh, never mind," Ursula nodded happily. "A beggar and a drunk," said Inez, laughing, hugging Pablo. "Is that true?" "Of course, yesterday he probably collected a record number of bottles," said Martina, "because he was banging on them all morning as usual." "Probably he's already selling," laughed Castor. "He didn't show up today, surprisingly. If he's not visible now, we'll hear him in the evening. He'll start playing his guitar again," said Benjamin. "Sometimes it's unbearable, but I think he sings and plays well." Everyone fell silent immediately. The guests looked at whoever had said those words. "What?" I asked with a little astonishment on my face. "He sings well," Mato repeated, his voice less confident now. "All right, son, go and play with Dominic outside for a while," said Ursula, seeing Benjamin's expression. Needless to say, Benjamin got very angry when he drank, but he also wasn't happy when people said things he didn't agree with. He never hit his wife or son, but he could start a fight to prove his point. Mato didn't wait long and went outside with Dominic, who was already standing in the doorway. "Benjamin, calm down," Ursula said softly, with a forced smile on her face as the children left. "I am calm," Benjamin laughed falsely. Perhaps the guests believed it, but Ursula certainly didn't. She knew it wasn't true. "Well, if our son likes how that old man plays, then he likes it. It's his choice," Benjamin concluded, taking a sip of alcohol. "Listen, maybe we should have another party soon. Let's get together in someone's backyard." Martina changed the subject. "We haven't done that together for a long time, except today, of course." "I don't think that's a bad idea," said Ursula. "And we agree too," said Pablo. Then everyone started discussing the next topic. "How are you?" Ursula asked, approaching me. I was now away from everyone, pouring myself a drink. "I'm fine, just fine." "You're not going to get angry with your own son about this nonsense, are you?" "No, I won't. I told you, it's fine." "I don't think so," Ursula said and turned back to the guests. Another half-hour passed. Surprisingly, the weather that day wasn't very sunny, and now it looked like rain was imminent. The sky was already overcast. Benjamin had almost forgotten the whole situation and continued to enjoy the day, discussing something with his friends and colleagues. They had already discussed dozens of things when the rain began to form. Dominic ran back to the house to get a drink. "Dominic, is it raining outside?" Ursula asked, watching the boy. "No, but it's about to start," he replied, then called Matto inside. Dominic didn't answer, nor did he go outside. He seemed to be in a trance. "What are you waiting for? Go and call Matto." Dominic, he's talking to Oscar," the boy replied reluctantly. Only then did I realize that he could have just called his friend instead of saying that. "Oscar?" I asked. All the guests left, and now they finally saw the old man, those who had never seen him before and those who saw him every day. He was standing next to Matto near the road, closer to the Navarro house. They were both chatting and laughing happily. "Oscar, what the hell are you talking about with our son?" I shouted. "Dad, he didn't do anything," Matto said quickly, turning to face his father in a frightened voice. "Matto, you don't understand much yet. Please go inside," said the father, clearly agitated. "But, Matto, go inside and take Dominic with you." Matto's face immediately fell. He picked up the kite that had been in Oscar's hands earlier. When the boy disappeared behind the door, Benjamin spoke again, turning to the old man and forcing a smile. His hands were at his sides, a posture that usually indicated dissatisfaction. Then he lit a cigarette and blew smoke into Oscar's face. "It seems we've already told you not to approach or speak to our son, Oscar," Benjamin said slowly, his tone indicating that he was talking to someone upset. "Benjamin," Ursula said quietly. "Wait." Matto just asked for help untangling the kite. "I've barely spoken to him," Oscar replied calmly. "Really? Then you should have ignored him completely," said Benjamin. "Understand us correctly. We don't approve of you going near our children at all and living here in general." "And what's the reason?" I asked calmly. "Tell me, why do you hate me so much? Do you want a reason? Frankly, we just don't like you. You walk around here with your bottles, drinking every day." "I don't drink," said Oscar, adjusting his hat in the same calm voice. "But that's not how it looks to us. Anyway, I think you get the idea and there's no need to explain further. Have a nice day." Benjamin forced a smile again. Everyone went back into the house. Oscar stood in the same position for a while, his expression sad, then indifferent. Oscar didn't care that the rain had started a while ago. He was preoccupied with something else. At 0:30 on August 7th, the guests had just left, but when only the residents of the houses on this street remained, they gathered again. They gathered and dumped their garbage in the old man's yard. Matto watched this scene vividly from his window on the second floor. He could never understand why everyone was constantly throwing garbage in the old man's yard. What had he done? He seemed like a good and kind person. What was wrong? If his parents allowed it, he would have liked to spend time with him, but it wasn't meant to be. On August 9th, Benjamin's birthday, all the families agreed to meet in someone's backyard. It was decided to have a mini party at Castor and Martina's house. Until the 9th, everyone continued to throw garbage in Oscar's yard. Surprisingly, the yard was always clean. They constantly littered his yard, and he constantly cleaned it. The old man never asked why the neighbors behaved like this. Perhaps he thought it would be pointless. "It's strange, after his birthday, the old man hasn't sung at night once, and he seems to be seen less often," said Castor. "Doesn't that matter to you?" I asked. "Well, I don't know, maybe I like his songs," Castor said with a serious expression, then laughed out loud a second later. "Don't scare me like that, Castor. I'm worried about you," I replied. "Well, what can I say?" the man continued. Okay. Dominic and Matto were playing with the Diaz family dog. Suddenly, Matto noticed a familiar figure walking along the road. It was him, the universally despised old man. "Ah, here he is again. This old man hangs around here and annoys me," said Martina, adjusting her glasses. She brought a glass of alcohol to her lips. "Hey, Oscar, where have you been? We haven't heard you howl for a while," I shouted immediately. Everyone laughed except Matto, and Dominic paid no attention to what was going on. "Okay, come and join us, we're having some kind of party here," he said, flipping a fajita steak on the grill. The old man moved a little closer. "Here, don't be shy, sit here." Matto seemed happier. He approached the table and picked up a tortilla. The boy looked at Oscar and smiled at him. The old man smiled back. "What will you have? Juice, beer, tequila?" "Juice. Honestly, I overdid it that time and I won't deny it," he said, handing Oscar a glass of juice. "Sorry." But unexpectedly, whether by accident or not, after saying those words, I spilled juice on the old man's shirt. It was now completely stained. "Oh, sorry," everyone laughed again. At that moment, Matto became sad again, and the smile disappeared from his face. He looked disappointed about something. On August 10th, Ursula was returning from her vacation today, so she spent the whole morning getting ready for work. Meanwhile, Benjamin and Matto were having breakfast in the kitchen. "Dad, why do you always throw garbage in Oscar's yard?" Matto asked unexpectedly. Benjamin put down his fork. "Son, believe me, he doesn't mind. We do it for fun and entertainment," I replied, surprised by my son's question. "But he doesn't seem to think it's funny," said Matto. "And yesterday he didn't think it was funny when you spilled juice on his shirt. Dad, don't think about it. Did you want to visit Martina and Castor today and play with Dominic?" I decided to change the subject. Yes, I did. Benjamin had never really thought about why they started throwing garbage in Oscar's yard, but his little boy, on the other hand, took an interest. Matto was already in Dominic's room and they were playing a board game. "Don't you feel sorry for Oscar?" asked Matto. "I don't even know. Mom and Dad always talk about him like that." "In what way?" "In different ways. Yesterday, Dad spilled juice on his shirt, you saw. I think he was really upset." "Probably. And on Dad's birthday, he yelled at Oscar for no reason." Matto didn't say any more about Oscar because it was clear that Dominic didn't care about him. At night, everyone woke up to loud noises. Everyone ran outside. It was Oscar letting off fireworks from his yard. "Has this old man completely lost his mind?" I asked. "We need to call the police," said Ursula. At that moment, everything stopped. At 11:36 p.m., on August 11th, I was suddenly woken up by something. I woke up to bright lights flashing in the street. Slowly, I got out of bed and approached the window. An ambulance was parked near Oscar's fence. The paramedics were carrying him on a stretcher. The old man was conscious. I was startled to see the ambulance, but was soon relieved to see that Oscar was alive. I debated for a long time whether I should go to my parents and tell them about it. Apparently, they hadn't woken up yet. I decided to tell them tomorrow. At 9 a.m. on August 11th, I hurried downstairs. My parents hadn't slept for a long time, but they were strangely quiet. There was a fresh newspaper on the table next to them. I wanted to talk about the old man, but I didn't have time. "How is that possible?" Ursula asked her husband. "I don't know, dear. We never knew anything about him, and now we're finding out such things from a newspaper." "Casa dos Alonso. Pablo?" I asked happily as I entered the kitchen, but as soon as I saw Inez's face, the joy disappeared. "Pablo? It really was him." Pablo slowly picked up the newspaper and read the article from end to end. I never knew who he was, and it was him. The old man we constantly humiliated and threw away. Inez, it was him. It was Oscar, do you understand? Inez said with tears in her eyes and in a hysterical tone. "Darling, and we were throwing garbage in his yard," she repeated several times. Pablo hugged the girl. "Casa dos Dias. We need to get everyone together and go to the hospital immediately," said Castor when the whole family had gathered. He put the newspaper on the table and the three of them left the house together. Article about the forgotten hero. According to preliminary data, today Oscar Moreno, 60, was taken to hospital. It turned out that in the past he was a person of great importance. It is known that many years ago he lost his family in a fire. After that, he didn't give up and continued working in the fire department, saving many people and children. According to newly received information, one of the girls he saved as a child lives nearby. At midday, all the residents of the three houses gathered. How is this possible? Everything written in the article, I just can't believe it. I'm in shock. Is it really true? Then we're all complete idiots. We need to go to him urgently and ask him to tell us everything, if he wants to talk to us and not send us away. Finally, all three families gathered anxiously and drove to the hospital. Various feelings of worry and immense guilt dominated their minds. They had lived next door to a man who had dedicated almost his entire life to saving others, and yet they had thrown garbage in his yard. He lost his family in a fire, and they thought he wasn't needed by anyone. At the hospital, Oscar was told he had a mild concussion from a fall at home, but managed to call the ambulance himself. Now the man was resting peacefully and would be released soon. "You can take him if you're his friends," said the doctor. "Yes, of course." The old man finally left the room. He had been the only topic of conversation for these three families, and now he was standing in front of them. Oscar was very confused. "What are you doing here?" he asked incredulously, already putting on his familiar straw hat. "And you all came together. Are you going to throw garbage here too?" "Oscar, we all know about you." "Well, not everything. Just what was written in the paper." Oscar paused for a few seconds. "So, what do you want?" "We want forgiveness. We're interested in knowing what happened to you. Very interested, of course, if you want to tell us. And even if you don't forgive us, we want to know that you're okay. We'll never throw garbage in your yard again. We'll always help with money if necessary. Oscar, please forgive us. We've been real idiots and assholes. Please forgive us." Suddenly, from the group, Inez approached Oscar. "Oscar, is it true what is written in the article about saving the little girl and that she lives next door to you? So it's me." "Well, my dear neighbors, I'll tell you everything, but definitely not here, and it will take an hour or even 2, maybe 10. Do you really forgive us? Are you willing to tell us your personal truth, to reveal yourself after everything we've done?" "I'm not sure yet, we'll see," the old man laughed. They all headed for the familiar street. Oscar himself suggested they go to his house. "It's so beautiful here," said Martina, looking around. She wasn't the only one who thought so. There were lots of photos and frames on the sideboard in the living room. They showed children and a young woman. On the table was that same guitar. Oscar instructed everyone to sit down in comfortable places. For about 5 minutes, he simply remained silent, as if pondering everything that had happened that morning. Was it really necessary to tell them about his life? Maybe it was worth it, at least to finally make them understand. To learn the real truth. After 5 minutes of contemplation, Oscar smiled gently. He looked again at the entire living room where the neighbors had gathered. Their eyes showed sadness, and it seemed that they wanted to repent even more sincerely, without mockery or laughter. Then Oscar looked at Matto, his eyes the most fervent. It was clear that he was in great anticipation. The man had always known that this boy treated him differently, not like all the others. The old man approached the sideboard and picked up one of the frames. It showed a very pretty girl. Now he seemed to care little about the way his neighbors had treated him all this time. He just wanted to get something off his chest. "Yesterday I let off fireworks, you must have heard, and probably been very unhappy. I understand, but it wasn't by chance. I wanted to pay tribute to the memory of someone very dear to me. Many years ago, on August 10th, I lost my love, my only love, and my children." Now everyone felt even more uncomfortable. "Oh, Elisa," said Oscar with pleasure, and closed his eyes for a few seconds. He sat down more comfortably in the armchair and opened his eyes again. "My muse, Lyre, and Aphrodite, the best and most unique dream that was destined to come true for a very short time in this long and ephemeral life. It was the best time spent with the shining angel. It seemed as if she came down from heaven and, after a while, went back there. I saw her for the first time at the end of the 1970s, entering the Institute. I don't know how it happened, but I immediately felt overwhelmed by happiness. A warmth spread through my chest, as if my heart had been illuminated by something bright and sincere. It all happened in the lobby of the Institute. In a second, I froze like a pillar. I was mesmerized by his enchanting eyes. They were like 2 dark swirls, beautiful brown eyes in which I saw the whole world. As I understood later, Elisa was 6 meters away from me, talking to another girl. She suddenly noticed me, but quickly looked away. And I kept looking. Another second passed. She said goodbye to her interlocutor and looked at me again. Elisa smiled sweetly and went out into the street, and I remained standing like a pillar, my mouth open. Just 5 minutes after she left, I came back to myself. I ran into the street, but it was too late. She was nowhere to be seen, neither on the porch nor on the road. After that day, all my thoughts were of the beautiful brown-haired, deep-eyed nymph. And the days went by, 1, 2, 3, 1 week, 2 weeks. Unfortunately, I never saw her again. Of course, I was constantly saddened by the fact that I didn't even know her name. I didn't know who she was. I immediately enrolled at that institute. My studies were in full swing, and only she distracted me from my thoughts. And so a month passed. I had already come to terms with the thought that I would never see her again, even though she was there on the day I enrolled, as I later learned. She didn't study there. She appeared in my life for a fleeting moment and disappeared just as quickly, never to return. Then a month passed. One day, when my class was over, I decided to go with a friend to a nearby cafe. We sat down at a free table and ordered a cup of coffee. Our conversations were mundane, about studies, future work, tasks for the next day. My friend was discussing girls from the institute, but I didn't care. At first, he thought I wasn't traditionally oriented. Oscar laughed. But suddenly, by chance, my gaze fell on the window, and then I saw a person sitting near that window. I looked again to make sure, and, as you may have guessed, I was very surprised. My excitement became so intense that my palms became sweaty, and my heart started beating twice as fast. My soul wanted to jump for joy, and a storm of emotions began to swirl endlessly in my head. It was her, the mysterious and attractive stranger with the enchanting eyes. She was engrossed in reading a book and smiling just as sweetly as the day she smiled at me in the corridor of the institute. She still hadn't noticed me, and I was too scared to move. My mood lifted instantly, and I couldn't take my eyes off her. My friend Durant had wandered off to the bathroom at that moment, and I pondered many times before approaching her. The whirlwind of endless thoughts overwhelmed me. She must have a fiancé, she's so beautiful, I thought. I didn't approach her while I was alone at the table. Finally, my colleague returned. He immediately noticed that I was staring somewhere and how my face had paled. Durant also looked in that direction. "Do you know her?" he asked cheerfully. "No," I answered quickly. "But would you like to meet her?" "Well, I don't know," I said hesitantly. "Then you would. She probably has a fiancé. She's so beautiful and presumably very intelligent." "You won't know until you try, my dear friend," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. "But come on, go and talk to her and introduce yourself, otherwise you'll regret it later. I can see how you're shaking, and look, your palms are already sweaty. You're obviously really in love with her." "I don't know." "I'll call her now," Durant said, turning to her. He opened his mouth. "No!" I exclaimed, closing my eyes to calm down. "I'll talk to her myself." And I finally plucked up the courage. Up until that point, I'd only had one relationship with a girl, so I didn't have much skill in these matters, and I had very little confidence at the time. But I still decided to approach her. I got up from my chair and walked towards her desk on shaky legs. It felt like I'd been walking for 5 whole minutes, although it lasted less than a minute. Finally, stopping right next to her desk, I smiled like a fool. She looked at me, and, through her eyes, I realized that she recognized me, as if she remembered me. "Hello," she said quietly, smiling sweetly. I opened my mouth, but I couldn't greet her. I felt like a complete idiot. Looking into her eyes, I began to drown in them again. "Would you like to sit down? There's a space here." I sat down at the table right in front of her. Up close, she was even more beautiful. "Good morning," I said, as if it wasn't my voice. "Did you want something?" she asked in the same calm, firm voice. No, I mean yes, of course I did." "Yes, I did," I said, and stopped talking. I wanted to run out of the cafe so as not to embarrass myself any further. I must have been so red at that moment that I looked like a tomato. "Well, what is it?" she said slowly, still smiling. Her calmness and composure shook me. "Actually," I coughed slightly. "Actually, I really wanted to meet you, if you don't mind, of course." I added the last sentence in a lower voice. She laughed softly. "All right, let's get to know each other then. What's your name?" "Oscar. And yours?" "Elisa." My heart wasn't beating so hard anymore, and the atmosphere became much calmer and more welcoming. Now it felt like I was standing next to something familiar and long known. I felt so good and warm inside. Elisa mentioned that she remembered me from the day we met. She went out into the street. Elisa also admitted that she waited for me to come out of the hall. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, so she left. But now we've met again. What else could it be but fate? In the end, we met successfully. It turned out that she was also 20 years old, just like me. That day, she was in the corridor of the institute because her father worked there. It turned out that one of my teachers was her father. Unfortunately, I had strange relations with him. For some reason, he didn't like me from the start, and later he was against his daughter having a relationship with me. We didn't listen to him. We loved each other, dreamed of each other, wanted each other. We made plans and lived for each other. After our second meeting, I was sure and understood that she was my true destiny. Nothing and no one would stand in our way. I realized that I would love no one else but her. After we met, we started spending a lot of time together. 3rd, 5th, 10th, 20th dates. Many more dates and many more loving moments. She fell in love with me almost immediately, and I loved her with all my heart. Today, I decided to invite Durant to coffee and thanked him for encouraging me to meet her. Elisa and I could no longer live without each other. 6 months passed, a wonderful and sweet life. And after those 6 months, we became as one. Every morning, I woke up with the happy thought of seeing her, my best and beautiful Elisa. I loved everything about her. Her hair, her eyes, her facial features, the curves of her body and her shining soul. Elisa intoxicated me more than any high-proof alcohol. All I needed was that thought to love this life. A year later, we finally started living together. We rarely had disagreements, and when we did, they were for trivial reasons. We would quickly reconcile and go off somewhere. In general, a year and a half after we met, I did this. I plucked up the courage and proposed. We got married almost immediately. My parents lived in another city, and of Elisa's parents, only her father was still against it. He was miserable. On the contrary, her mother was happy for her daughter and our marriage. Now I had a wife with whom we lived in our own house. My studies were at the highest level. I was studying to become a first aider. I had always wanted to help people in trouble, and soon I managed to combine studying and working. It was difficult, but I managed. Often on cold nights, Elisa and I loved to sing a song together. "Maybe you heard it while you were sitting in our house," laughed Oscar. I'm sorry if that caused any inconvenience. And on one of my birthdays, Elisa gave me a guitar, the same one that's on the table now. She always liked the way I played for her. Her eyes were full of delight and sparkle. As well as the guitar, she also gave me this wonderful straw hat, said the old man, taking off his hat. On an ordinary day, we decided to go to an amusement park. We chose the Ferris wheel, and only when we got to the top did Elisa realize that she was very afraid of heights. So I held her as close to me as possible and suggested she close her eyes. After that, I started singing our favorite song softly to her, and Elisa relaxed a little in my strong embrace. She was able to open her eyes again and calm down completely. Half a year into our married life, we found out that Elisa was pregnant. Our happiness knew no bounds. We seemed to be the happiest people on the planet. I felt elevated again, just like the first day I met her. At 23, I had the best job, a wife, and a son. Elisa gave birth to a boy. We called him Adrian. Playing the guitar wasn't enough for me, so I started writing poems for my love. There was a box full of them. When she read my poems, I could hear her voice with enthusiasm. I also continued to love and adore her to the full. After a while, Elisa became pregnant again. A baby girl was born who was an exact copy of Elisa. We called her Augusta. As was clear earlier, we used to live in another city. Elisa was involved in sewing various clothes and creating jewelry. And as I mentioned before, I loved saving people, working in the emergency service. I fervently believed that I was doing the best thing possible. So we lived together for 6 whole years. 6 years of pure joy, happiness, and eternal pleasure. A life full of harmony and fulfillment. Adrian was already 4 years old and little Augusta was 3. But one day turned my life upside down forever. It influenced everything, absolutely everything. It was the most horrible and inevitable event in my life. That day was August 10th. I had a shift at work and Elisa had a day off. All 3 were at home. Unfortunately, at home, Oscar's expression became the opposite of what it was. He continued, "So I came home from work. I didn't have to go near the house to understand what was happening. Huge clouds of smoke were rising into the air above our house, and the fire was so bright and fiery that it blinded the eyes. The fire truck was already parked nearby. 'Where are they?' I shouted. 'Who?' the fireman asked without thinking. 'My children and my wife,' I replied. 'They're being rescued,' he answered after a few seconds. I wanted to run into the house. I heard them calling me, but those screams were already beyond consciousness. I didn't hear or see anything, I just wanted to save them. But I couldn't even do that. Because the next minute, one of the firemen carried 2 bodies. Another fireman carried the 3rd body. They were all unconscious. I hurried over to them. They were now lifeless. They tried to provide medical assistance at the scene, but to no avail. Now, once cheerful and lively faces had become silent with permanently closed eyes. They no longer spoke or laughed. My children no longer called me daddy and my wife their beloved. They were dead. For a long time, I didn't want to recognize that. I didn't want to acknowledge that that damn fire had taken their lives. My Elisa's life and the lives of my precious children. The whole house simply burned to the ground. At work, I was offered a vacation to recover and rest properly, but I didn't need a break. If I took a vacation, it would be 100 times worse. So I decided to find all the strength I could and keep going, to help people like them and not let them die like that. I always tried to save as many lives as possible, and I knew Elisa would be happy about it. Happy that I hadn't sunk into drink and lost myself. Happy that I continued to live, albeit with great difficulty. I continued to value and enjoy the best moments of this ephemeral life. Because of my age, I was already entitled to a pension, so I decided to leave that city forever, never to return. I moved to different cities, one city, then another, then a third. Nothing appealed to me, but then I stopped there. I didn't work anymore. I lived off my pension. But one day, I saw a house on fire. There were no firemen yet. A girl was standing by the balcony begging for help. "Please help! My daughter is inside, please!" I didn't say anything. I ran into the house, found the child, and pulled her out. "It was you, Inez." Inez shed a tear, then another, and began to cry, approaching Oscar. She didn't say anything, just hugged the old man tightly. He hadn't expected it and was shocked again. "I'm sorry, Oscar. Please forgive us. I was so stupid," said Inez through tears. Then Martina and Ursula joined her. Pablo, Benjamin, and Castor were in complete shock and regret. They pondered all this information. Without a doubt, they felt very sorry for the old man. They all hated themselves for what they had done. "I never thought you were a bad person, Oscar." Matto ran up to the old man and hugged him. "Thank you, my dear, thank you. And are we going to fly a kite at the weekend?" "Well, I don't know. It's up to your parents." "Mom, Dad, can we?" asked the hopeful child. "Of course, son, we can." Now, almost every weekend, the neighbors loved spending time with Oscar Moreno. At every opportunity, they apologized for their terrible treatment of him. They helped him with money and no longer allowed him to collect bottles. In the evenings, they listened to his music. On one of the holidays, Oscar and Matto, as usual, flew a kite. The sky was blue and clear. "You're my best friend," said Matto, "and you, Matto, will always be my best friend."